So today we've tested out the factory Husqvarnas here in Italy at Faenza. We've managed to test out the 250s, which that team is the Rockstar Husqvarna. We tested out Covington and Thomas-Kjer Olsen's bike. Also as well, we've tested out Ice One Husqvarna factory team, and the riders there is Max Anstie and Gautier Paulin. I've tested the bikes out previously. Actually, I've tested them out now quite a number of years. The 250s, what are the 250Fs like? The first bike that I rode was Thomas Covington. Comparing his bike to from last year, it was quite nice, to be honest, because Thomas has got a US spec bike. When I say US spec bike, you know, he's got a pull rod there which is a little bit longer and the bike sits a little bit lower, and you certainly feel that out on track. Whereas when I tested it out last year, it actually felt a little bit soft. The settings were a little bit softer. The bike in itself, the suspension throughout, just the bike felt more balanced. It felt a little bit firmer. And certainly when he was riding around the track, you know, it didn't bottom out like it did before, and it certainly didn't collapse. Previously, you know, when you touched the front brake, what would happen is the bike would dive, and it would dive quite a bit. Now that's how Thomas likes his bike to be set up. I personally like that, you know, I like a good front brake that has a lot of feel, and you know, it's not spongy, but there's just a progressional hardness to it and a nice feel. And I agree with Thomas, you know, that's what I like. Just the front, just to dip a little bit, just so you're secure enough and you know that you're planted in the turns. Yeah, regarding his bike did feel low, but I actually quite like that as well. Obviously, I'm a lot bigger than Thomas, so I could flatten the rear end quite easy, but actually the power in itself is just so impressive. I mean, they won't tell you what RPM these bikes rev to, you know, neither would factory KTM. So they tell you that they rev to 14,000 RPM. Now, I'm not calling them a liar, but I've rode Steve Dixon's Yamaha back in the day, the Cosworth Yamaha. Now that revved to 16, and I would say that these are pretty close to that. That's all I'm saying. So yeah, regarding on the bike and on the power and the engine of itself, you know, when you come out of the turns, you can just be in second, you can be in third, and the bike will just rev and pull. The torque's there, the engine's there, and the bike just absolutely eats up the ground. As a matter of fact, you know, I can see why most MX-1 riders would like to step back and ride an MX-2 bike, and that's just because they know that they will be able to, you know, ride it into the ground and not be wanting more. Regarding his setup, they're the main factors of his bike. He does maybe like to change his gear in like a 2 at the rear, but he's running, I think it was 1452 or 1453. Regarding on his engines, you know, after every 2 GPs, these bikes, they're gone. They're basically practice bikes. The engines are shipped back off to the factory, and you know, they're replaced with new ones. Thomas Olsen's bike. That bike, I really liked that bike last year. He had a little bit, his gearing was a little bit different when I rode it at Lommel. He had a 13 front sprocket instead of a 14, and that's because he's a bit bigger kid and he likes it to, you know, he liked it to snatch and pull a little bit more from out the turns. His bike actually, you know, it was a little bit higher setting. It was more European spec, so it didn't have the longer pull rod, didn't sit down a little bit lower. His front forks were a lot stiffer than TC's, Thomas Covington's front forks, because, you know, he's a sand specialist and he's a bigger kid. The power as well, you know, again, was just absolutely insane. Because it was a little bit more hard pack, obviously I was running a little bit higher gear, and the bike just pulled, and not once did they ever hit the rev limiter. Also as well, which is quite interesting and which is quite good what these factory teams do, which we touched a little bit on in the factory KTM test, is that they make bikes specifically for these riders. So, you know, when I say specifically, you know, it can be as simple as handlebar bend, front brake. Thomas TC has his front brake even machined out a little bit more, so he can have a little bit more feel on the front brake. And when I say that, we've got TO, Thomas Olsen, with higher clamps. So he's got, I think it's 47 mil, and TC's runs 37. Comparing it to Prado or Jonas's bike, they are very similar, and we're told that they have the same engine spec. And I'd believe that as well, to be honest, because the bikes did have the same characteristics, and they've just got them different gearing, you know, slightly different gearing. And when we're talking about 1 tooth at the rear, that really does make a difference for these boys when they're pushing so hard on the track, because the competition, you know, it's sharp, it's right up there at the pointy end. The Ice One factory Husqvarnas. Antie Perrin is the manager of the team, and it's his baby, and them guys are professional throughout as well, and so is Jackie. You know, and their main aim is to basically give the rider what they need. Now, one of the things that I picked up on while I've been speaking to the guys was that, you know, that they were really doing a lot of work and a lot of development work, and they really wanted to produce something for their riders, which is Gautier Paulin and Max Anstie. They take a new bike, so they had the new bike after the GP season with the new frame and the new engine, so you know it was all new this year, and they basically let the riders ride the bikes, find out clamps, find out clamp height, handlebars, front brake, braking, you know, what position they want their foot pegs in, what linkages they want, then work on suspension, then they go to town on the engine and see what they want, and different mapping and a little bit different setting, what gearing they'd like. And it seems like they'd done quite a little bit of work and quite a lot of testing. Probably not that they'd like to admit to, but that was what I was feeling. So yeah, so going to Gautier's bike. The bike was actually power-wise very close to Jeffrey's bike. You know, it come in with such a hit, so it would roll through, and it'd have such an aggressive hit, to the point where I know the track had gone off a little bit later in the day, but you know the rear wheel was just coming around to me and saying hello, and the front wheel was just lifting up. The power was so much. But the bike up on the handlebars, it's amazing really. It looks like it's a spaceship with the amount of buttons that are on there. You know, so you've got like map 2, map 1, obviously the start button, the off button, and the launch control button. He's also got the linkage as well at the rear, so it can squat down the rear. So the bike is really low for the starts. And I did a start on the bike, and let me tell you, that thing rips out the gate. But you just felt that, you know, if you wasn't on point with that bike and you was off somewhere, it would be hard to push and to be aggressive, and to, you know, if you, basically for what I'm saying is, it was very easy for me to get out of shape on that bike. The front forks actually felt a little bit softer this year than previous years, and I say this every year, but obviously the back was quite hard, and it was quite high up, and the seat was, obviously it's a higher seat because of his height. But where he sits so far over on the back of the bike, you know, I'm obviously going to feel that, because you know I'm shorter, and I'm going to feel that the bike wasn't so balanced for me. Yeah, Max Anstie's bike, that was a pleasure to ride, and it was probably my favourite bike out of all of the bikes, if I'm honest. The suspension this year was a little bit firmer, the front forks were a little bit harder, and the power delivery and how much power the bike has and delivers to the ground, it's done in a totally different way. And it's quite interesting really, because I said to Antie, you know, it seems now that last year's bike when I rode Max, that was a 250F rider getting onto a 450. Now I'm riding Max's bike, and I'm feeling that I'm riding a 450 rider's bike. You know, if I was in second, it didn't rip my arms off, but yeah, it would just deliver the power to the ground so good and make meters. Not that you'd want to leave it in second, to be honest. I mean, these bikes are 4-speed gearboxes, but you know, you'd be in third and it would just drive and torque, pull straight from pretty much nothing up the off-cambered hills. I just like that, you know, whether you tried the maps, you felt a difference, and whether you went into second or third, you could feel the benefits, you know, from them. I mean, it's quite surprising really, because comparing Max's bike to the KTM, I would definitely say that his setup, his engine, you know, it feels like Tony's, you know, and Tony's nine times world champion, and Paulin's bike is very much like Jeffrey's to some extent. Not totally, but the characteristics are, you know, you can compare the characteristics, to be honest.